Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into silk cushions and stepping through carved sandalwood doors into a palace that smells faintly of cardamom rosewater and something else you can't quite place: feathers. Yes, you heard that right. This story involves birds. And not just any birds, parrots. Ornate, intelligent, maddeningly loud parrots who, depending on whom you ask, were once considered mouthpieces of destiny. We're headed to a royal court where cages gleamed like treasure chests. Courtiers craned to hear squawks turn scripture, and a ruler believed that the future didn't lie in the stars, or in sacred texts, or even in dreams, but in the bright, beady eyes of a green-plumed bird. And sure, maybe you'll fall asleep before we reach the part where one parrot predicts a meteor storm and causes a month-long panic, but that's okay. The story will wait. The parrots? Not so much. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a courtyard surrounded by sunlight, filtered through silk canopies. There's water trickling in tiled fountains, gold leaf mosaic underfoot, and a warm breeze brushing against your cheek like a curious cat. Above you, columns carved with curling vines and strange birds stretch up to a sky that's almost painfully blue. You're in the palace of Sultan Malik Shah al-Zahir, one of those rulers who is either completely brilliant or completely unhinged, depending on which century you're standing in. Historians still argue whether he was a visionary or a man slowly losing himself to symbolism. But what's undeniable is this: he built an empire of sound. And not human sound. Birds. You follow the noise clucks, whistles, cackles, and that unmistakable repetitive squawk of a parrot that's learned to mimic human speech a little too well. The sound leads you past velvet drapes, past lounging guards in teal robes embroidered with golden wings, until finally you step through an arched doorway into a room that doesn't feel like a room. It feels like an aviary had a very rich cousin. There are cages here, yes, but not the kind you're thinking of. These are domed, silver-latticed masterpieces, each one suspended by delicate chains. Within them, birds shimmer like living jewels. Some are emerald, others the shade of crushed pomegranate, a few look dipped in sapphire. And every single one has a name. Not a pet name, a title. You spot a sign beneath one cage that reads, "Winds from the North." The parrot inside bobs its head twice, then mutters something that sounds suspiciously like bad omen. You turn to another, he who saw smoke. That one is entirely still watching you with unnerving clarity. And over there, Dancer on Stars. She lets out a sound that is halfway between a chirp and a laugh. The Sultan believed each bird could speak prophecy, not in the way you or I might expect, not with full sentences, but through patterns. The way they responded to colors, the order in which they touched, carved dice which mirror they pecked first, whether they sang when the moon was visible. And here's where it gets interesting. People took it seriously. Courtiers, generals, even visiting nobles would wait in this hall for a parrot to nod at the right time or mimic a word that felt significant. A military campaign was once delayed because winds from the north wouldn't stop flapping his wings. An engagement was called off because two birds stopped eating at the same time. Coincidence, maybe. Or maybe the birds just understood the palace better than its inhabitants. Some of the Sultan's advisors found this whole setup, let's say, less than scientific. One even called the aviary a noisy distraction wrapped in incense, but none dared to mock it publicly. Because here's the thing, sometimes the birds got it right. Not vague horoscope right. Specific. There was the time green-eyed Fortune squawked fire the day before lightning struck the grain stores. Or when Watcher on the Wall refused to speak the entire week before a solar eclipse. Historians still argue whether the Sultan trained the birds to react to cues, or if he simply surrounded himself with so many of them that something was bound to seem prophetic. But to those who lived it, Those golden cages were less like decoration and more like temples. And the Sultan, he didn't think the birds were random. He believed they were chosen, that their ability to mimic wasn't just a party trick. It was the universe choosing a different throat through which to speak. You move closer to one of the cages. The bird inside tilts its head, then says perfectly clearly, "You again." You freeze. Then it fluffs its feathers and begins humming a tune. Okay, that's unsettling. You look around and realize you're the only person in the room now. The guards are gone. The air is thicker. The birds are quiet. And somewhere in the corner of the room, one cage begins to swing. Not from wind, not from movement, just because. You decide maybe it's time to leave the Hall of Prophecy, but as you step out into the hallway, you glance back one last time, and you swear one of the parrots winks at you. The hallway is cooler now, narrower, less echo, more stone. You trail your fingers along the wall as you walk its surface chipped and worn smooth by time, and many nervous hands before yours. Every few steps, you catch the faint rustle of feathers or the echo of a squawk from somewhere distant, but you're not sure if it's coming from another room or your imagination still trailing behind from the aviary. Eventually, you arrive at a smaller door. This one's wooden heavy, studded with brass bolts that have grown green with age. It opens with the softest creak, revealing a chamber far removed from the grand spectacle of the aviary. No windows, just a low ceiling, dark velvet cushions, and an oil lamp sputtering on a carved table. But the air, it hums with memory. This is the Sultan's secret hall, his sanctuary of signs, his whispering chamber. Not many were allowed in here. You step carefully, and immediately the scent hits you. Old parchment, dried fruit, something slightly metallic. On the walls hang charts, not of stars or geography, but of bird behavior. Arrows drawn from perch to perch, tiny annotations like "sang when curtain lifted" or "refused pomegranate." Now, it's part science, part superstition, part obsession. In the center of the room is the strangest piece of furniture you've seen so far, a sort of table cage hybrid, square waist high with polished panels and inlaid mirrors. Inside, perched on a slender rod, is a lone parrot entirely white, save for a golden ring of feathers circling its neck. Its eyes are closed, but when you approach, they snap open like shutters. This is the Sultan's personal oracle, or was. Records call him Voice of the Veil, and yes, it's probably a stretch to believe one bird held so much sway. But the Sultan thought differently. This bird didn't just repeat phrases, it chose them, carefully, deliberately, as though it understood. You pause at the table and whisper something simple. "Hello." The parrot blinks. Then it taps the metal perch 3 times and chirps once. From the corner, a voice says, "He likes you." You jump slightly, turning toward a figure sitting cross-legged in the shadows. An elderly servant, wrapped in a saffron shawl, eyes clouded with age, but sharp nonetheless. She doesn't introduce herself. Doesn't need to. He speaks to few, she says, nodding toward the bird. But when he does, it's always the right time. You want to ask her if she ever believed in the bird. If the Sultan truly did. But she's already speaking again, her voice like rustling parchment. Every night he came here, she says. Just after prayers, he'd bring dates. Place one on the table. Wait for Voice of the Veil to speak. Sometimes it was a single word. Other times a phrase. Once he said an entire sentence. You raise an eyebrow. "Beware the stone with no shadow," she whispers. The next day, a boulder dislodged from the garden wall and nearly killed the court physician. You don't know what to say. Coincidence, clever conditioning, or something else. Historians still argue whether Voice of the Veil was trained through reward and repetition, or if the Sultan, consciously or not, chose to hear what he wanted. One scholar suggested the bird's phrases were edited after the fact, recorded by scribes in ways that made them seem prophetic. Another theory, more fringe, more fun, claims the parrot was a conduit, not for gods, but for the Sultan's own subconscious, like dream interpretation, but with feathers. Either way, it's clear that what happened in this room mattered. There are pages of official records where Voice of the Veil is cited alongside generals, advisors, and court astronomers. The bird's responses, vague, strange, sometimes nonsensical, were treated with the same weight as military reports. A chirp here, a tap there, and wars were postponed. Marriages canceled. Taxes lifted. You move closer to the cage. The bird shifts on its perch and lets out a soft click-click noise. Then, in a surprisingly low voice, it says, "No turning back." You and the servant both go still. She raises a hand slowly. He says that when someone is meant to hear it, you swallow, hard. Meant to hear what? She doesn't answer. Just reaches into her sleeve and pulls out a tiny pouch. From it, she spills a handful of small flat stones onto the table, each one painted with different symbols: moons, daggers, leaves, eyes. She arranges them in a circle, then places a silver bell in the center. Ask a question, she says. You glance at the bird, who seems almost smug now. Okay, you say. What happens if I stay? The bell vibrates slightly. One stone rolls forward, a painted serpent. The parrot croaks, twice bitten. You glance at the servant. She shrugs. It's not always clear. You exhale slowly and step back. The bird watches silent again. Before you leave, the servant calls out, "He only speaks truth." But truth doesn't always mean clarity. Good. Because your brain feels like it's been tangled in vines. You walk out of the chamber back into the cooler hallway. Your ears ring faintly, as though something very old just whispered to you from the other side of a curtain. And as you pass by the heavy wooden door again, you swear the bird mutters one last thing. Not a word, a laugh, a dry knowing chuckle. You find yourself wandering into the gardens now, the night thick with the scent of jasmine and something deeper earthy, ancient like stone remembering rain. The moon's light glints off tiled fountains and pearlescent pebbles in the pathways. Somewhere nearby, a bird shrieks. Not a parrot this time, but one of the wild ones that still nest in the older walls. You pause, listen, and just for a second, you imagine what it must have been like before all of this, before the aviary, before the rituals, before the Sultan decided that prophecy came in green feathers and curved beaks. Let's go back a little. Let's return to the beginning. The story starts, as many of these do, with a boy. The young Prince Malik wasn't destined for greatness. He wasn't even first in line. Born under an eclipsed sun, something palace astrologers immediately labeled unlucky. He grew up in the long shadows of older brothers, court expectations, and one very intimidating father who believed in math, military, and very little else. Malik was quiet, observant. He preferred the company of scrolls and shadows to tutors and tournaments. And animals, particularly birds, they fascinated him, especially parrots with their endless chatter and unsettling mimicry. He once said they reminded him of ghosts who'd figured out how to play tricks. But everything changed on his 12th birthday. The details vary depending on the chronicler, but the core of the tale is consistent during the festivities. Amid dancing, feasting, and a very ill-advised firework display, a green parrot belonging to one of the palace gardeners flew directly into the banquet hall. It circled once silent, then landed on Malik's shoulder. And then it spoke. "Hide the ink." Not a phrase you'd expect from a bird. Not "pretty boy" or "hello." Just "hide the ink." No one knew what it meant. Until the next morning, when the Sultan's prized celestial scrolls, the ones copied by candlelight over decades, were found smeared, water-damaged, ruined. One bottle of black ink had shattered overnight. No culprit. No explanation. Just a bird with very good timing. Malik took it as a sign. From that moment on, he sought the bird constantly, asked to keep it, built it a cage of sandalwood and silk, gave it mango slices soaked in honey, and in return, it gave him words. Not many, but just enough. Watch the moon, turn left, no apples. Harmless mostly, until the no apples incident, which allegedly prevented a poisoning attempt. Again, historians still argue whether that story was embroidered after the fact, or if some servant truly did spot the prince push away a fruit platter seconds before a kitchen boy collapsed nearby. But for young Malik, it didn't matter. The bird had spoken. He had listened. And he had lived. That bird, which he eventually named Whisper, became the first of many. After Malik became Sultan, thanks to a series of events that frankly would make for their own wild bedtime tale, he didn't forget the green parrot with cryptic warnings. In fact, he leaned into it, expanded it, built a whole philosophy around it. Parrots, he declared, were not just mimics. They were receivers, tuned to divine frequencies, perhaps even the thoughts of ancestors. They didn't just repeat, they channeled. This theory wasn't entirely his. In certain pockets of early Indian and Persian mysticism, birds, especially those capable of human-like speech, were believed to bridge worlds. There's even an old tale of a parrot reciting scripture from memory after its monk owner drowned. Whether or not the Sultan had read those texts is unknown, but the resonance undeniable. And so Malik began collecting, not just birds, but those who knew how to work with them. Trainers, mystics, performers, even illusionists. If someone had ever taught a bird to say anything, he wanted them in his court. Soon the palace grounds were echoing with birdsong from dawn until dusk. Cages hung like lanterns from corridors. Courtiers paused to bow not only to the Sultan, but to whichever parrot sat on his shoulder that day. It got theatrical. Every morning Malik would consult 3 parrots. He called them the chorus. Each was trained to choose from a series of objects, colored stones, feathers, tokens carved with symbols. Their selections were recorded by scribes and interpreted by a team of avian diviners. Yes, that was an official title. Yes, they had robes. And no, you couldn't just become one. You had to pass a test. The test involved a bird, a mirror, and a riddle. But that's a story for later. For now, all you need to know is that the Sultan's days began not with coffee or counsel, but with bird fortune. And if the birds were silent, meetings were delayed. If they shrieked, guards doubled. If they squawked the same syllable in unison, a public proclamation was made, and the city held its breath. Some called it genius. Others called it madness with feathers, but no one could deny it worked, at least for a while. You return to the present, walking quietly now along the garden's edge. Crickets are chirping. Something hoots in the trees. You spot a faint rustle in the bushes, probably a lizard. Or a ghost. Hard to tell these days. You glance up at the tower above, where a faint light flickers behind a carved screen. And you wonder, was it all luck? Clever training, mass, suggestion? Or did Malik Shah really find a way to listen to something most of us never hear? You wait. Just a second longer. But no voice calls out this time. Only the wind. You step inside a quieter wing of the palace, now far from the main halls and gardens. The floors creak slightly underfoot, not from wear, but from age, as though the stones themselves are sighing. The scent of ink and rosewater drifts through the corridor. You're headed to the chamber of interpretation, where the parrot's strange rituals weren't just performed, but decoded. A wide wooden door opens with a muted groan, revealing a circular room lined with scroll racks and low cushions. In the center, a wide shallow bowl carved from obsidian. Around it, 3 pedestals, each topped with a perch, and on each perch, a parrot. The chorus. One parrot is vivid green with a patch of silver feathers on its chest. The second is pale yellow with crimson streaks around its eyes. The third is blue so dark it seems to shimmer like ink in shadow. Each of them sits perfectly still as you enter, watching, listening. This is where you learn how the Sultan's divinations actually played out. Because yes, while a lot of people think the parrots just squawked phrases like fortune cookies on wings, the truth is, the ritual was more elaborate. Much more. First, the object's small symbolic tools laid out before the birds. Today they include a tiny mirror, a red stone, a twisted shell, a carved ivory token in the shape of a snake, and a strip of silk dyed midnight blue. There's also a pair of dice handmade with astrological symbols instead of numbers. An attendant enters behind you, dressed in teal with a golden sash. He bows and gently places one item into the obsidian bowl, a silver bell. That's the signal. The ritual begins. One by one, the parrots descend from their perches. Their movements are graceful, rehearsed, yet unpredictable. The blue parrot taps the red stone twice, then hops back. The green one lifts the mirror with its beak, flipping it face down. The yellow one pecks at the silk, then pauses, head tilted, as if listening to something you can't hear. You can feel your heartbeat slowing, as though the birds are pulling you into their rhythm. When the birds are done, the attendant collects the items and places them on a cloth in the exact order of interaction. Then he begins to recite the interpretation, not as a solid prophecy, but as layers of possible meaning. The red stone touched first, war or passion. The mirror turned truth concealed. The silk silence, secrets, or approaching night. Historians still argue whether these readings were ever consistent. Some believe the attendants subtly influenced the bird's actions with gestures, sense, or tone of voice. Others claim the birds were trained to recognize specific combinations and respond accordingly, an avian algorithm, so to speak. But the more fringe explanation, and the one the Sultan preferred, was that the birds weren't reacting to the objects at all. They were tuning in to vibrations. The energy of the question being asked, the mood of the court, the balance of fate. Sometimes Malik would ask direct questions aloud. Other times, he'd write them down and burn the paper in a silver brazier near the birds, as if to say, don't answer the words, answer the intention. There's a famous record of a session just like this. A diplomat had arrived from a rival kingdom, bearing gifts and flattery. The court was torn should they trust him. The Sultan asked the birds. That day, the green parrot pecked 3 times at the ivory snake. The next morning, the diplomat was gone. Not dead, just quietly escorted to the border before dawn. No scandal, no farewell, and weeks later, a letter was intercepted from that same man offering intel to the Sultan's enemies. Coincidence, clever palace spies, or just snake sense? You kneel down now, inches from the obsidian bowl. The birds are quiet again, but their eyes gleam in the candlelight. One of them lets out a single note, a low musical whistle that doesn't sound like mimicry. It sounds deliberate, like a flute's first breath before a song begins. There's something hypnotic about it. The symmetry of the room, the mirrored floor, the way the sound doesn't echo but seems to wrap around your head like a scarf. And then there's the whisper. Not a voice, not even a word, just a sensation, like something ancient brushing past your ear. You look at the birds, they look back, and for a moment, the room feels less like a chamber and more like a circuit, a loop of stone, sound, silence, and breath. You wonder if this is how it felt for Malik. Not like controlling fate, but like being in tune with it. Like placing your fingers on a string that's already vibrating and simply learning how to listen. Your fingers twitch. You want to place an object in the bowl. Just one. See what they do. But you stop yourself, because this isn't your ritual. Not tonight. You rise slowly and bow. Yes, you actually bow to the birds. The green one bobs its head in return. The blue one closes its eyes. The yellow one lets out a sound that honestly sounds like a giggle. And as you leave the room, you realize your pulse is still in sync with the rhythm of the parrot's movements. Calm, measured, like a ticking clock that somehow keeps time not with gears but with feathers. You step back into the hallway, and for the first time you hear nothing at all, just stillness. And somewhere perhaps fate deciding what to whisper next. You wander away from the palace interior, now following a colonnade that leads into the city. The Sultan's reach doesn't stop at the gilded gates. No, his bird-bound beliefs have spread far beyond the palace walls. And as you walk, the soundscape shifts. Gone are the fountains and flapping wings. Now it's street vendors, clinking glass, chattering children, and parrots. So many parrots, perched on awnings, hanging from wooden stalls, sitting on shoulders like feathered accessories. They call out greetings, prices, weather predictions. Fresh figs, one squawks. 3 coppers and a storm tomorrow. Another cries. Watch your step, traveler, moments before you nearly trip on a cracked cobblestone. Welcome to the capital of Sultan Malik Shah's domain, sometimes called the Bird City. And in this moment, it lives up to the name. It started slowly. As word of the Sultan's beliefs trickled into the streets, merchants began acquiring parrots. First as novelty, then as necessity. A seller with a talking bird attracted more customers. A barber whose parrot could mimic prayers earned the trust of devout clients. A spice merchant taught hers to identify each scent. Cinnamon, yes. Saffron, no. Soon it wasn't just a gimmick. It was a culture. The city adapted. Entire markets sprang up dedicated to bird care, carved perches, perfumed sand-embroidered parrot vests. There were food stalls offering diced mango-roasted nuts and pickled berries specifically for birds. Artisans created miniature bird masks for festival days. You pass a street mural. Now it shows a radiant parrot perched on the crescent moon, whispering into the Sultan's ear. And yes, there were schools. The Academy of Avian Linguistics opened in the city's eastern quarter, a marble building with domes like bird cages, and teachers who spoke in pairs, one to students, one to parrots. Their mission, to develop a standardized syntax for parrot communication. Not just mimicry, but structure. Verb-object emotion, one professor insisted. A parrot that says, "Eat apple happy," is expressing a full thought. Historians still argue whether any real progress was made. But the records don't lie, exams were held. Graduates received scrolls sealed with a feather. One student even wrote a grammar guide titled, "The 12 Calls of Clarity," complete with diagrams and phonetic guides. You think you spot a copy displayed in a nearby bookstall, bound in leather etched with tiny birds in flight. Of course not, everyone bought into it. Astrologers, for one, were furious. Their consultations were being replaced with bird readings. Why chart stars when you could ask a blue-feathered oracle over breakfast? One scroll of the time reads, "Even the butcher's parrot now prophesies eclipses." What place has a sky reader in a world where poultry holds power? You can't help but chuckle. And then there were the gamblers. People who trained their birds to select dice numbers or peck at tarot cards. The line between prophecy and performance blurred, then vanished entirely. And every time a parrot happened to be right. Oh, the crowds it drew. You pause in front of a small shop where a parrot in a saffron vest is reading a customer's fortune. No, really. The bird hops between cards laid out on a table, each one illustrated with strange symbols. A wave, a dagger, a spiral. When it pecks at the spiral, the shopkeeper nods solemnly. "A journey inward," she whispers. "Be ready." It's part joke, part ritual, but also kind of moving. You turn into a quieter alley where a boy is teaching his bird to say, "I forgive you," over and over. "I forgive you," he repeats softly. "I forgive you." And when the parrot finally echoes the phrase, the boy cries. Not loudly, just enough. It makes you wonder, maybe this isn't about belief or accuracy. Maybe it's about connection, about needing something to speak when you can't. But even in Paradise Cracks form, with so many parrots repeating so many things, how could anyone be sure what was real? One night a merchant claimed her parrot had predicted a flood. She warned everyone, moved her wares to higher ground. The flood never came. She was accused of false prophecy. Her shop was looted. Another time, a parrot screamed fire during a poetry reading. Panic ensued. People trampled each other to escape. Turns out it was just mimicking its owner's dramatic voice. A few fringe thinkers began calling for restrictions. They claimed that the parrots were too influential, that they were becoming a crutch for logic, an excuse for fear, a mouthpiece for manipulation. One even wrote, "We do not know if the birds speak truth, or if they simply echo our madness louder than we dare to." You reach a small bridge now spanning a koi pond filled with golden fish. On the railing, a parrot stares at its reflection in the water. For a moment, you swear it sighs. You lean beside it. "Do you believe in all this?" you whisper. The parrot doesn't answer. But then it tilts its head, and in a voice that's both familiar and strange, it murmurs, "Still listening." You blink. It hops away, and you're left alone with the koi, the breeze, and a city that hums, not with engines or drums, but with the feathered echoes of a ruler's strange dream. The sun is just beginning to set as you make your way back toward the palace gates. The sky is laced with threads of gold and plum, and the city's noise dims into a softer hum. You notice how the parrots grow quiet too, as if even they respect the hour when light thins and shadows begin to stretch like questions with no answers. But the palace isn't sleeping yet. Tonight you've been summoned to the Court of Feathers for a retelling of one of its darkest chapters, a tale passed around in hushed tones by cooks, scribes, and guards alike, each version slightly different, but all carrying the same warning: never cross a parrot with the Sultan's ear. You arrive in a tall candlelit hall, lined with silk drapes that flutter without wind. A storyteller sits in the center legs, crossed face half hidden beneath a hood, and around them courtiers recline on velvet cushions, wine in hand, eyes alert. You sit, the room quiets, and the tale begins. It starts with a man named Ilyas, a trusted advisor, beloved by the people, known for his wit, his loyalty, and a truly legendary mustache. He had served Malik Shah for years, through droughts wars and 3 different parrot phases. He was the kind of man who didn't believe in feathers predicting fate. Privately, of course. Publicly, he applauded each parrot's squawk as though it were poetry. He even gifted the Sultan a rare red macaw from the Western Isles, hoping it would say something wise. It did, unfortunately, because one morning that macaw, newly settled into its cage, opened its beak and said, "Ilyas takes gold at night." The room went silent. Courtiers turned. The Sultan frowned. "Ilyas," he said gently, "is this true?" "Of course not," Ilyas insisted. "Birds mimic. Someone must have taught it that." But the damage was done. That afternoon, another parrot repeated the same phrase, and the next day, a third joined in. "Ilyas takes gold at night." The phrase caught like fire. It appeared in the mouths of street parrots on scribbled notes, slipped under doors, even carved into the bark of a fig tree in the central garden. People whispered that the parrots knew something, that they spoke with divine insight, that maybe, just maybe, Ilyas had been stealing royal funds. The Sultan was torn. Logic screamed that this was absurd. But the birds had spoken, and he had built a kingdom on the idea that their words mattered. So he ordered an investigation. It took 3 days, and what they found wasn't gold, but paper, letters, notes in Ilyas's handwriting expressing doubt about the parrots, doubt about Malik's decisions, doubt most damningly about whether any of it was real. No embezzlement, no theft, just treason of belief. Historians still argue whether the parrots were manipulated. Maybe someone trained them. Maybe a rival advisor planted the phrases. Or maybe, just maybe, one bird picked up the phrase from a grumbling servant, and the rest followed echoing it until the air itself turned against Ilyas. Whatever the truth, Ilyas was exiled, not killed. The Sultan wasn't cruel, just shaken. But from that day forward, things changed. Birds were watched more closely, their phrases logged in bound journals. Any parrot who spoke too freely was moved to the outer gardens. And the Sultan, though still devoted, grew quieter during readings, less celebratory, more cautious, because for the first time he had seen the danger of believing too deeply in something that talks back. You glance around the room now, watching the faces of those listening. Some smirk, some nod. One man mutters, "My cousin's parrot called me a liar once." You're not sure if it's a joke or a confession. The storyteller leans forward. "There's a lesson in the tale," they whisper. Not that parrots lie, but that truth, when repeated enough, becomes prophecy. You leave the hall with those words circling in your mind. The torches along the walls flicker. A breeze swirls through the corridor, bringing with it the scent of roasted nuts and candle smoke. Somewhere above, A parrot calls out a phrase you can't quite catch. You pause beneath the balcony. Ilias takes gold at night, it says again. Not loud, not mocking, just there, echoing, like a memory too old to forget. You walk faster after that, unsure whether you feel pity for Ilias or for the Sultan. Because it's one thing to build your world around mystery. It's another to be betrayed by it. As you pass through the courtyard, you spot a servant feeding the birds. Each parrot gets its own bowl, its own slice of fruit. But one sits apart, cage covered in black cloth. You raise an eyebrow. That one, the servant says, softly repeats things that haven't happened yet. You wait. He doesn't elaborate. And you decide you don't want to know. Not tonight. You wake the next morning to the sound of drums and bird calls, woven together an oddly beautiful duet that lures you toward the palace balcony. Outside, the capital sparkles under the early sun, its rooftops alive with fluttering flags, laundry lines, and you guessed it, parrots preening in the warm light. But today the air feels different. Something's coming. You descend into the outer courtyard where preparations are underway. Silk canopies ripple in the breeze. Musicians tune flutes beside fountains. Fruit sellers argue cheerfully near the gates. And in the middle of it all, a large wooden stage is being assembled, its beams etched with feathers, stars, and wings. An emissary has arrived. Not just any emissary, this one from a neighboring empire. A kingdom that until now has regarded Malik Shah's bird-based policies with equal parts mockery and suspicion. But now, they're sending gifts, seeking counsel. Some say they want a reading from the parrots. Others whisper of something more serious, an alliance. You find a place near the crowd just as the caravan arrives. Camels draped in plum-colored silk guards in polished bronze, and in the center, a palanquin trimmed with silver vines. From it steps a tall figure in royal blue, wearing a turban that seems to shimmer like storm clouds. This is Prince Tariq, second son of the High Sirdar of the Western Court. He bows deeply, smiles, but something in his eyes watches the parrots too closely. It doesn't take long for the skepticism to show. "I have brought my own reader," he says with a grin too sharp to be friendly. He gestures, and a woman steps forward, her arms covered in bangles. From her shoulder, a raven hops into her hand. Sleek, black, silent. A bird with real intelligence, he adds. The court gasps, not at the insult, but at the boldness. Ravens were sometimes considered omens of death. To bring one into a court ruled by parrots, audacious. Malik Shah, now older, but no less composed, simply nods. Then let us both ask our questions. What follows is part performance, part challenge. Each bird is asked the same question written by scribes and whispered into the air like incense. The raven responds first, dropping a bone onto a grid of symbols. The woman reads its placement. The answer is delay. The parrots are next. The chorus selects a golden coin, pecks at a curled ribbon, and echoes almost lazily. Wait, 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 the court murmurs. Even Tariq raises an eyebrow. Not because the parrots are right, but because they agree. Historians still argue whether this moment marked the beginning of a brief truce between the two kingdoms, or whether it was theater designed to show off the parrots' talents. What's clear is that after this meeting, delegations from other courts began arriving, each with their own birds, omens, oracles. There was the merchant queen who brought canaries that sang in coded rhythm, the mountain chieftain whose hawk would circle once for yes, twice for no, even a northern lord who swore his owl could read facial expressions. But none of them had what Malik had, a culture. Because while others viewed prophetic birds as novelties or tools, Malik had built a system, an ecosystem, a place where belief architecture and rhythm all supported the weight of mystery. And not all visitors came to mock. You stroll through the guest gardens now, where visiting dignitaries once walked in curious reverence. In the journal of one ambassador, there's a note that reads, "Even if the birds speak nonsense, the people listen. And in listening, they find something truer than fact." That's the thing. Whether they believed in parrots as prophets or not, everyone believed in what they represented, a hope that the world could whisper answers if you knew how to hear them. But of course, not everyone listened with the same ears. In the southern quarter of the city, you hear of a fire that broke out weeks after the emissary left. A bookstore torched by zealots who believed the parrots were idols mocking divine will. The fire spread, destroying 3 shops and a tea house. The parrots, it's said, all survived. And across the border, a scholar was executed after publishing a treatise suggesting that the birds were no more divine than dice. His final words, if the stories are to be believed, were, "Ask the parrot if I'm wrong." The more the birds were believed in, the more powerful they became. And power, as always, invites fear. As you make your way back toward the palace gates, a child runs past, followed by a parrot that squawks. He's hiding something. The child shrieks with laughter, but a nearby guard flinches. That's the danger, isn't it? A joke, a phrase, a mimicry mistaken for meaning. A parrot may only be echoing, but what happens when an echo sounds like truth? You pause beneath a tree whose branches are heavy with blossoms and birds alike. One parrot hangs upside down watching you. You're still here, it says. It's unsettling how normal that feels now. And you wonder if enough people believe in a sound. Can it become prophecy? If the world listens hard enough, does the whisper shape the wind? You walk on, and behind you, the parrot calls once more, still listening. The palace feels quieter today. Not empty, just heavy. Like the silence after a storm or the pause between notes in a long, slow song. You're walking along a corridor, lined with soft tapestries. When you first hear the scratching feather on parchment ink on paper, thought turned into form. You follow it and find him, the philosopher. His name is Jalal ibn Safid, and he's not like the others in court. No silks, no gold trim. Just worn linen robes, a table full of notes, and a frown so deep it could hold water. He doesn't look up as you enter. He's in the middle of a sentence, dragging his quill like a sword across the page. You glance over his shoulder. He's titled this one, "The Fallibility of Feathered Omens." Bold. On a shelf nearby sit 2 parrots, not in cages, just perched free, still silent. They watch him with what you'd almost call suspicion. He finally speaks. They're not magic, you know. You nod. They're pattern-recognizing mimics. Glorified recording devices. Clever, yes. Beautiful, yes. But not prophets. You wait because that's clearly not the end. And yet he says, this entire court has been reordered by feathers and squawk. You learn that Jalal was once a favorite of the Sultan, a tutor, a friend, a believer even until one day he wasn't. It was the year the Sultan postponed a crucial irrigation project because a parrot tapped the symbol for thirst twice in a row. Jalal protested, was dismissed from court duties, reassigned to this quiet corner to study the birds. And study them he did. He's cataloged tones, gestures, environmental cues, vocal habits. He's proven that certain parrots mimic only certain voices, that their predictions often repeat patterns they've heard dozens of times. He has graphs, charts, an actual parrot-to-sentence ratio guide. He points at one of the birds. That one, he says, has predicted 6 floods, 4 fires, and 2 deaths. All false. But every time people rearrange their lives. You know why? You don't answer. He does anyway. Because we want the birds to be right. We want mystery more than we want accuracy. Historians still argue whether Jalal was bitter brave or just tired. But his writings survive, passed through scholarly circles like forbidden fruit. Some praise them, others scoff. A few swear his notes caused a brief decline in parrot-inspired decisions. Brief. You sit across from him now, the light from the window pooling between you, like melted gold. The birds haven't moved. They're not evil, he says, suddenly voice softer. They're just mirrors. And when we look too long, we forget we're the ones standing there. It's not that he hates the birds. Quite the opposite. He admires them, studies them with affection. It's the people that frustrate him. The way they surrender decision-making to something that repeats sounds without context. And yet, he keeps them near. Why not just leave, you ask? He doesn't laugh. He sighs. Because someday, one of them will say something I haven't heard before. And when it does, I want to know whether it's the bird talking or me hearing what I want. That's the curse of logic, isn't it? You can understand the machine, see the wheels turn, but when it hums a melody you didn't program, part of you still wants to believe it's music. You thank him, rising slowly. He nods once, already returning to his writing. And as you reach the doorway, one of the parrots finally speaks. Still bitter, it says. Jalal pauses, then smiles. Accurate, he murmurs. You leave the room laughing. Outside, the palace is alive again. Drums echo across courtyards. Petals fall from trees like painted snow. The Sultan is holding open court today, and the crowds are gathering. But you're drawn instead to a quieter space. A rooftop garden, empty except for one caretaker trimming vines. She nods at you, points toward the far end. There, in a golden cage that's half covered with cloth, sits a parrot you haven't seen before. Older, ragged, its feathers faded to dusty jade like a tapestry left too long in the sun. You recognize it. Voice of the Vale. The Sultan's first oracle. Retired now, mostly silent, but not forgotten. You sit beside the cage. The parrot watches you. You say nothing, and neither does it. Historians still debate whether Voice of the Vale ever actually predicted anything. Some think it was all stagecraft. Others claim the bird's silences were more telling than its words. A fringe theory suggests the bird stopped, speaking the moment it realized its voice could destroy lives. But sitting here now, you feel none of that. Just a quiet presence, a calm weight, a mirror. You reach into your pocket and place a small silver bell on the stone ledge. Not to summon, just to honor. Then you rise, give a gentle bow, and turn to go. And as you reach the garden gate, a voice calls softly behind you. Not loud, not commanding. Just one word, maybe. You stop. Don't look back. You just smile, because maybe is all the answer you need. The palace is unusually restless today. You can feel it in the marble, hear it in the bird song or the lack of it. The air holds its breath as if something is about to shift. You follow the murmurs. Servants pass quickly with heads bowed. Courtiers gather in small knots, whispering behind raised fans. And in the aviary, the grand echoing heart of it all, something is missing. Not someone, something. The blue parrot of the chorus. Gone. It wasn't stolen. It wasn't ill. It's still there on its perch, feathers pristine, eyes bright. But it hasn't said a word in 3 days. And that's never happened. You arrive in time to witness the Sultan himself standing beside the silent bird. His beard is whiter now, streaked with ash gray. His robes less ornate, but his eyes sharp, restless, searching. He leans in gently, offers a strip of pomegranate. The bird blinks, does nothing. One of the attendants, a young man with shaking hands, clears his throat. Perhaps he's just tired. Malik doesn't respond. He's listening harder than ever. Another parrot on a nearby perch chirps faintly, then mimics a human sigh. That's when the panic begins. Not loud panic, not riots. Something subtler, more dangerous. Whispers. The chorus has broken. The bluebird was the interpreter, the one that linked the others. Without it, the rituals lose shape. The meanings blur. And to a court raised on rhythm and prophecy, that silence feels like a scream. Historians still argue whether this was superstition, coincidence, or a clever act of rebellion. Some suggest the bird had reached the end of its trained phrases. Others say it chose to stop because it knew something. The Sultan calls for a private audience. You're there not because you belong, but because at this point, no one questions your presence. You've become part of the scenery, a shadow in the wings. He addresses the court. The bird has spoken, he says softly, and its message is silence. No one breathes. He continues. We've heard so much for so long. Perhaps we've mistaken noise for wisdom. And then for the first time in years, he He cancels the daily reading. That night, the city holds its breath. Lanterns are lit, but celebrations are dimmed. People don't know how to function without the chorus. You wander the alleys, hearing snippets. What if the war is near? Should I still marry without a sign? My parrot stopped singing too. The ripple of silence has spread. And then just after midnight it returns. Not from the aviary, but from the temple steps. Someone claps once, and a voice answers. Now, that single word is repeated by parrots across the city like an echo catching fire. Now, now, now. It doesn't make sense. Not on paper. But it feels like a message. Urgent. Clear. Final. You rush back to the palace just in time to see the Sultan standing beneath the moon hands, clasped behind his back. He turns when he sees you. She spoke, he says. Who? Voice of the veil. You realize he doesn't mean the city's parrots. He means his bird, the one in the garden. She said it was time. Time for what? You don't ask. Because you know. The next morning, the Sultan steps down from the throne. Not in disgrace, not in defeat. Just done. He passes the reins of rule to his daughter, a brilliant strategist who prefers letters over feathers, charts over chirps. But she doesn't abolish the aviary. She turns it into a sanctuary, a place of beauty, not prophecy. And the chorus. They are released, set free across the lands. Some stay close. Some vanish into the hills. A few return from time to time, perching on balconies, repeating words that once meant everything. Wait, listen, maybe. One parrot, blue, quiet, elegant, is last seen flying west, toward the sunset, toward nothing, or everything. Historians still debate what caused the Great Silence. Was it the natural end of a strange tradition? A ruler's change of heart? Or the final note in a song that was never meant to be endless? But one record remains carved into the stone just beneath the palace dome. In the stillness, we heard the truth. And it did not chirp. You sit beneath that carving now, knees drawn up listening to the wind. And somewhere not far, a bird calls once and goes quiet again. You return one last time to the place where it all began. The Hall of Prophecy stands quiet now, its silver cages empty. Its once sweet scent of fruit and feathers faded into dust and sandalwood. You push open the door slowly. No creak this time. Just the soft sigh of memory. Sunlight drips through colored glass above, casting shards of green and gold across the floor. You step carefully, like walking through light might break it. No attendants, no birds, just silence. But it's not empty. The air here still holds something. A rhythm, a hum, like the walls themselves are remembering, echoing, replaying all the whispers, laughs, gasps, and gasped prophecies that once lived in this room. You make your way to the center. The old obsidian bowl is still there, its surface dark as night, still polished, still perfect. You brush your fingers along the rim, cold, unmoving, still. You sit down beside it, cross-legged on the dusty floor, and close your eyes. You don't expect anything to happen, but you want to listen anyway. Because now you understand something the Sultan took a lifetime to grasp. Not all prophecy arrives in noise. Some truths ride silence like wind on feathers. Some answers hide in the spaces between. You breathe in, and with that breath comes a memory of a garden, a whisper, a parrot that said maybe, of a city that taught birds to speak and people to listen, of a sultan who followed a dream until it became a kingdom, and of a single parrot, silent on its perch, who knew when not to speak. You open your eyes, and in that moment, you hear something. Not with your ears exactly, with your ribs, your pulse, the sound of not waiting anymore. Outside, the palace is changing. Vines have grown across its outer walls. The gold has faded into bronze, but the city beyond lives on. Children still mimic the parrots they've only heard about in stories. Some wear little wooden wings at festivals. Others whisper to the sky just in case. No more omens, no more bird-born proclamations. But, not forgotten, in the far market district, A musician plays a flute with holes shaped like beaks. In a tea shop, a dusty cage hangs in the corner, not for a bird, but for flowers. In the academy, still open somehow, a single instructor keeps a scroll on her desk, titled Echo Grammar Revised Edition. They don't teach prophecy anymore. They teach how to listen. You make your way out of the palace, pausing once at the empty perch where Voice of the Veil used to sit. You reach into your pocket, not for a bell, not this time, but for a small smooth feather you picked up in the garden. It glimmers faintly in the sunlight. You place it on the perch, step back, and smile. Because maybe, just maybe, the Sultan was right. Not about everything, not always, but about the part that matters. That somewhere between silence and sound, between reason and belief, between one bird's nonsense and another's wisdom, is the thing we all search for. A sign that we're not alone in the pattern, that the universe might be listening too. You turn, begin to walk, and just before the door closes behind you, something brushes past your ear. A breeze, a memory, or the faintest echo of a voice that once knew how to answer. Maybe. Let the rhythm slow now. Let the palace fade into the dark, its echoing wings folding around you like sleep. The stones have sung their last prophecy for the night. The parrots have flown into dreams. You are safe here. You are still. And the world, that strange and whispering world, will keep speaking, even in silence, especially in silence. So breathe in. Let your body soften like dusk. Let your thoughts land gently on a branch you do not need to name. And rest. Just rest. The future will wait until morning. It always does. Thank you for joining us on this journey today. Maybe by now you've already drifted off to sleep, and if so, we hope this story brought you peace of mind and helped you rest a little easier. Deep sleep makes life better, and we're truly happy to be part of that. Until next time, sweet dreams.